The thumping bass rattled the walls of the old bar, every beat vibrating in my chest like a second heartbeat. The air was thick with sweat, beer, and the kind of reckless joy that only comes from losing yourself in music that's too loud to think. Anna was beside me, her eyes glued to the stage where a scrappy local band was ripping through a song that made the crowd surge forward, desperate to touch the music. This was our scene, gritty, imperfect, but alive. And right there, in that chaos, was where our dream was born. Anna leaned in close, her breath warm against my ear. "This is it, Brian. This is the vibe we need. Something real." I nodded, caught between watching her and watching the band. Her excitement was infectious, and I could feel my own pulse quicken, matching the drummer's frantic rhythm. We'd been talking about it for years, our own music festival. Something that would put our little town on the map, something that was more than just a weekend distraction. It was supposed to be our legacy. "Yeah," I said, squeezing her hand. "This is just the start." We left the bar buzzing, both from the music and the cheap whiskey shots we'd downed in celebration of whatever this thing between us was. I held onto her tightly as we stumbled onto the cracked sidewalk, the summer heat clinging to us like a second skin. Our town wasn't much, just a collection of weathered buildings and empty streets that rolled up by 9 o'clock. But in our heads, it was a blank canvas, waiting for us to make something beautiful out of it. "We'll call it Backroads Festival," she said, her voice brimming with confidence. "We'll have bands from all over, make it something unforgettable." I could see it too. Stages spread out across the park, food trucks lining the streets, local vendors finally getting a chance to shine. It was ambitious, but we'd never been the type to shy away from hard work. Every late-night brainstorm, every scrap of paper covered in set lists and venue ideas. It all felt like the pieces of a puzzle falling into place. We worked on that dream day and night, fueled by nothing but caffeine, adrenaline, and the naive belief that nothing could tear us apart. Until Todd showed up. Todd wasn't like the rest of us. He wasn't from our town, didn't know our history, didn't care about our struggles. He breezed in like he owned the place, all slick hair and leather jackets, the kind of guy who made you feel like you weren't enough before he even said a word. But he had connections, industry know-how, the kind of clout that could turn our little festival into something real. At first, I thought he was our golden ticket. But looking back, I should have seen the warning signs. I noticed the way Anna looked at him that first night, when he was casually dropping names of bands he'd worked with, venues he'd booked. There was a flicker in her eyes, something I hadn't seen in a while. Admiration, maybe. Curiosity, definitely. I brushed it off, telling myself it was all part of the business. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel that first sting of jealousy. Things started to change after that. Anna was suddenly always busy, late meetings, long phone calls, excuses that felt just a little too rehearsed. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust that we were still on the same page. But the distance between us was growing, and every time I reached out to pull her back, she was just a little further away. One night, I came home late after meeting with potential sponsors, and there it was, the first undeniable crack. Anna was on the couch, her phone glowing in her hand, her face half lit by the screen. I saw Todd's name flash up in the corner before she quickly swiped it away, locking the phone like it was a reflex. "Who's that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just Todd," she said, too quickly, too casually. "He was just checking in about the lineup." I nodded, but something in my gut twisted. There was a time when she would have told me everything without me having to ask. Now, there were secrets between us, small but growing like weeds in the cracks of a sidewalk. I didn't say anything more. I just watched her from the kitchen, the glow of the phone reflected in her eyes as she typed away, and I knew, deep down, I knew, something had shifted. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the hum of the air conditioner the only sound in the room. Anna was beside me, but it felt like she was miles away. I closed my eyes and tried to picture our festival, the way we had imagined it that first night at the bar. But all I could see was Todd's smug face, Anna's stolen glances, and the creeping realization that the thing we had built together was already starting to crumble. I didn't know how, and I didn't know when, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let them take our dream without a fight. I spent the next few weeks trying to ignore the growing distance between us. Every day felt like I was grasping at something that kept slipping away, like trying to hold onto water. Anna and I were still working on the festival, but it wasn't the same. The late-night brainstorming sessions that used to bring us closer were now replaced by awkward silences and forced smiles. It was like we were coasting on autopilot, pretending we were still a team while our unspoken doubts gnawed at the edges. On Thursday afternoon, I found myself sitting in a coffee shop downtown, a stack of vendor contracts spread out in front of me. I was staring at the paperwork, but my mind was somewhere else, thinking about Anna, about Todd, about how the festival that once felt like our salvation now felt like a burden. The barista called my name, snapping me out of my daze, and I grabbed my coffee. Letting the bitterness of it jolted me back to the present. As I sat back down, I noticed Anna's car pull up outside. She was supposed to be meeting with a local brewery about sponsorship deals, but she was alone, looking anxious as she parked. I watched her for a moment, my stomach twisting as she pulled out her phone, her fingers flying over the screen. I'd seen that look before, a mixture of frustration and urgency. I wondered if it was Todd she was texting, and the thought made my chest tighten. A few minutes later, Todd's car pulled up beside hers. He got out, dressed in his usual casual swagger like he'd just rolled out of a rock magazine photo shoot. They met in the middle of the sidewalk, Anna's face lighting up in a way that hadn't been reserved for me in a long time. They didn't even bother with pleasantries, she just handed him some papers, and they leaned close, talking in hushed tones that I couldn't hear through the coffee shop window. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay seated. I wanted to storm out, demanding to know what the hell was going on, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I watched as Todd put a hand on Anna's shoulder, a casual touch that lingered just a moment too long. She didn't pull away. Instead, she laughed, that kind of laugh that used to be just for us, light, carefree, like they didn't have a worry in the world. My coffee suddenly tasted like acid. I shoved the paperwork into my bag and left without looking back. The bell above the door jingled as I pushed through, but they didn't even glance in my direction. I walked down the street, my mind buzzing with a mix of anger, jealousy, and a dull, aching sense of betrayal. That night, Anna came home late, her excuses tripping over each other as she tried to explain away her meeting with Todd. I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I played the part of the supportive husband, nodding and smiling while she spun her web of half-truths. Every word she said felt like another nail in the coffin of what we used to be. The next day, I decided to stop by the venue we were considering for the festival, a sprawling park on the edge of town, dotted with oak trees and enough open space to hold a small army of music fans. I needed to clear my head, and being there felt like reconnecting with the dream Anna and I once shared. I walked the grounds, picturing the stages, the crowds, the food trucks, and everything we'd talked about in those early days when our excitement felt like a wildfire that couldn't be contained. I was standing near the main field when I heard voices behind me. I turned and saw Anna and Todd walking together, deep in conversation. I hadn't expected them there. Anna hadn't mentioned anything about checking the venue again. I ducked behind a tree, my heart pounding in my ears as I strained to catch snippets of their conversation. "Just need to convince him," Anna was saying, her voice tinged with impatience. "He's stubborn, but if we push the right angle, he'll come around." Todd laughed, a low, smug sound that made my skin crawl. "Brian's not the problem. You are. You're the one who needs to decide what you want." There was a long pause. I peeked around the tree, just in time to see Anna look up at Todd with an expression I hadn't seen in months, vulnerable, almost desperate. It hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just business. There was something more between them, something deeper, and I could see the lines of our marriage fraying right in front of me. "Let's not do this here," Anna said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not now." Todd shrugged, slipping his hands into his pockets, looking every bit the picture of nonchalance. "Suit yourself. But remember, this festival is happening with or without him. The only question is, where do you want to be when it does?" Anna didn't answer. She just stared at the ground, lost in thought. I watched them for a few more seconds, my chest heavy with the realization that whatever Anna and I had was slipping through my fingers faster than I could grasp it. I stepped back, careful not to make a sound, and turned away from the scene. I walked back to my car, my mind racing. They didn't see me. They didn't have to. I'd seen enough. As I drove home, I made a decision. If Anna wanted to gamble everything on Todd, then fine. But I wasn't about to let them take the festival from me. Not without a fight. I'd make this festival happen, but on my terms. And when it was over, they'd both see exactly what their betrayal had cost them. Because now, this wasn't just about the music. It was personal. I couldn't sleep that night. The image of Anna and Todd at the park played on a loop in my mind, each repetition tightening the knot of anger in my chest. I tossed and turned, the clock ticking louder with each passing hour. By 3 in the morning, I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing ahead of me. It was clear, I couldn't let this slide. I wasn't going to be the fool watching his life fall apart from the sidelines. The next day, I called in sick to work. But instead of resting, I drove straight to a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. I ordered black coffee and spread out a notepad on the table, the same one Anna and I used to scribble ideas on when the festival was still ours. I flipped through the pages filled with our old notes, band names, food truck ideas, stage designs, all the little details we'd been so excited about. The memories felt like a cruel joke now. I sat there for hours, letting the bitterness fuel me. This wasn't going to be the festival we dreamed of, but it was still going to happen. And it was going to be unforgettable, but not in the way Anna or Todd expected. I scribbled down my new plan, each line fueled by the betrayal I felt. I reached out to bands that played songs about heartbreak, deceit, and loss. The kind of raw, emotional music that would turn the festival into something more than just entertainment. It would be a mirror reflecting Anna and Todd's betrayal. I wanted every note, every lyric, to cut through them like a knife. To make them feel the weight of what they had done. I called up the Broken Strings, a band whose songs were all about shattered relationships and bitter endings. Then there was Downfall Avenue, a group known for their explosive, gut-wrenching performances about infidelity. I sold them on the idea of a festival dedicated to missed opportunities and broken dreams, and they were all in. The lineup was coming together, and each act was a carefully chosen piece of the revenge puzzle I was building. I knew Anna was still clueless, thinking I was simply continuing with the original plan. She was so wrapped up in Todd that she didn't even notice the changes I was making. Every time we met to discuss festival logistics, she was distracted, lost in her phone, or throwing glances at the door like she was expecting him to walk in. She was checked out, and I used it to my advantage, working behind her back to transform the festival into something else entirely. When I wasn't coordinating with bands, I was crafting the festival's narrative. I worked with a local designer to create posters and promotional materials that hinted at the festival's true theme: missed chances, regret, betrayal. It was subtle, but if you looked closely, you could see it: images of broken hearts, faded photos, lyrics about infidelity woven into the background. It was my way of setting the stage, of ensuring that when the day finally came, there would be no mistaking what this festival was really about. I spent hours poring over every detail, obsessing over every decision. This was no longer just about music. This was my statement, my way of fighting back in the only way I knew how. Anna and Todd were going to walk into that festival expecting a celebration, but what they'd find was a reckoning. As the day drew closer, the weight of what I was doing settled over me. Part of me knew I was crossing a line, that this wasn't just about Anna and Todd anymore, it was about me and my inability to let go. But I didn't care. They had turned our dream into a nightmare, and this was my way of taking it back, of reclaiming something from the wreckage they'd left behind. I was ready. All that was left now was to wait and watch it all play out. The week of the festival arrived, and the town was buzzing with anticipation. Posters were plastered on every corner, social media was flooded with excitement, and tickets had sold out faster than any of us had expected. From the outside, it looked like the perfect success. But beneath the surface, everything was twisted. Anna and I were still playing the part of the devoted couple. To everyone else, we were the dream team making history in our little town. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. She was distant, and every time I tried to pull her into a conversation about the festival, she'd cut it short, muttering about being too busy. I could see the guilt flickering in her eyes, but she'd buried it under layers of denial. The night before the festival, we hosted a small pre-party at our house for the bands, a tradition we'd started in the early planning stages. It was meant to be a casual meet and greet, a chance to unwind before the big day. Anna flitted around the room, playing hostess, but there was a nervous edge to her movements, like she was afraid to stand still for too long. Todd showed up halfway through, swaggering in like he owned the place. He greeted everyone with that same fake charm, but when he spotted me across the room, I saw something different in his eyes. There was a flicker of recognition, Maybe even respect, like he knew I was onto him but didn't quite know what to make of it. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a confrontation. Instead, I kept my distance, watching from the sidelines as Anna drifted toward him, drawn like a moth to a flame. I made my rounds, shaking hands with the bands, and thanking them for being part of the festival. But in the back of my mind, I was counting down the hours until everything would unfold. I could feel the tension in the air, and it wasn't just about the performances. It was the weight of everything unsaid, everything hidden. Anna and Todd were laughing, but it was hollow, forced, like they were trying to convince themselves that everything was fine. As the night wound down, I caught a moment alone with Anna. She was standing in the kitchen, staring out the window into the dark, her expression unreadable. I walked up beside her, leaning against the counter, waiting for her to say something. She didn't. "You ready for tomorrow?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She nodded, but there was no conviction in it. "Yeah, I guess." I turned to look at her, really look at her. "This is it, you know. Everything we've worked for." Anna glanced at me, and for a split second, I saw the old her, the Anna I'd fallen in love with, the one who shared my dreams. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by the guarded woman she'd become. "Yeah," she said, barely above a whisper. "It's everything." I watched her walk away, her figure disappearing into the shadows of the hallway, and I knew there was no turning back. Tomorrow, everything will come to light. Tomorrow, Anna and Todd would see exactly what their betrayal had built. The calm before the storm was over. The reckoning was about to begin. The festival day dawned with clear skies, the kind of weather that usually promised a perfect day. But for me, the bright sun felt like a cruel joke, a mocking contrast to the storm brewing inside me. The town was already buzzing with excitement by the time I arrived at the park. Food trucks were setting up, bands were sound checking, and everywhere I looked, there were people smiling, oblivious to the hidden undercurrents that would soon come crashing down. Anna and Todd were already there, moving through the crowd like they owned the place. Todd was in his element, shaking hands and throwing around compliments like he was the star of the show. Anna trailed behind him, trying to keep up appearances. But I could see the cracks. She was nervous, glancing over at me every now and then as if sensing that something was off. But she had no idea just how off everything was. I watched them from the edge of the main stage, pretending to check the sound equipment while keeping an eye on their every move. This was it. Months of planning, of holding my tongue, of pretending I didn't know what was really going on. It was all coming to a head today. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins. And for the first time in a long while, I felt in control. The opening act took the stage, and the festival kicked off with a burst of energy. People were dancing, drinks were flowing, and the air was electric. On the surface, it looked like a celebration, but beneath that, every song, every lyric, was a carefully chosen dagger aimed right at Anna and Todd. The broken strings opened with a song called False Promises, a slow, haunting melody about betrayal and lies. I watched Anna's face as the lyrics sank in, her smile fading as she realized this wasn't the lighthearted festival we'd promised. As the day went on, the tone of the festival grew darker. Downfall Avenue took the stage next, ripping through songs about cheating and heartbreak, their lead singer's raw voice cutting through the crowd like a blade. The audience was eating it up, but I wasn't looking at them. I was watching Anna and Todd. I saw the realization dawn on them, the slow, creeping horror as they connected the dots. This wasn't just a festival. It was a message, one they couldn't ignore. Anna tried to pull me aside during a break between sets, but I brushed her off, pretending to be too busy. I could see the confusion and hurt in her eyes, but I didn't care. Not anymore. Todd, on the other hand, seemed less rattled, as if he thought he could bluff his way through it. But the cracks were showing. Every time a song hit a little too close to home, I saw him flinch. The climax came during the final act of the day. I'd saved the best for last, a band called Bitter End, whose entire setlist was about failed relationships and betrayal. They opened with a song called All That's Left, a brutal anthem about losing everything to lies and deceit. I watched as the lyrics washed over the crowd, some people singing along, others just swaying to the rhythm. But all I cared about were the two people standing near the front, trying and failing to keep their composure. As the band launched into their final song, a slow, gut-wrenching ballad about regret, I took the stage. The crowd cheered, thinking this was just the usual thank you speech, but my heart was pounding with something much darker. Thank you all for being here, I began, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. This festival started as a dream shared between two people who believed in creating something special for our town. But sometimes, dreams change. Sometimes, they shatter. I glanced at Anna, her face pale, her eyes wide with something between fear and disbelief. Todd's smile had finally faded, replaced with a scowl that told me he knew exactly where this was going. This festival, I continued, is about missed opportunities. About the things we lose when we let lies and betrayal get in the way of what really matters. It's about seeing the truth, no matter how much it hurts. The crowd was quiet, the energy shifted from celebration to something tense and uncomfortable. I let the words hang in the air, feeling the weight of them, knowing I was tearing apart the last shreds of the illusion we'd all been living in. For those of you who've ever been hurt, who've ever been lied to, these songs are for you. And for those of you who've done the hurting, well, I hope you're listening. I stepped off the stage, the applause polite but hesitant, like people weren't quite sure what to make of what had just happened. Anna and Todd were frozen, their faces a mix of shock, anger, and something else, guilt. For the first time, they couldn't hide from what they'd done. And for the first time, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. The festival ended on a strange note, the crowd's energy drained as the reality of the day settled in. People were still buzzing, but the mood was somber, conversations tinged with the heavy themes that had dominated the music. I watched as Anna and Todd tried to make their exit, slipping through the crowd with their heads down, no longer the carefree couple they'd pretended to be. I didn't try to talk to them. I didn't need to. The damage was done, and nothing they could say would change what had happened. The festival had been a success, but not in the way anyone had expected. It was less of a celebration and more of a wake, a funeral for what Anna and I had built together and for the relationship she'd thrown away. I stayed at the park long after the last of the attendees had left, watching the crew dismantle the stages and pack away the remnants of what had been. I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was empty. My revenge had played out exactly as I'd planned, but it hadn't brought me the closure I'd hoped for. I was still angry, still hurt, and now, on top of it all, I felt a deep sense of loss. Anna and Todd were gone by the time I got home. The house was quiet, their absence hanging heavy in the air. I wandered through the rooms, each one filled with memories that now felt tainted. I thought about the first time Anna and I had talked about the festival, and how excited we'd been to create something that would bring the town together. It was supposed to be our legacy, but now it was just a painful reminder of how far we'd fallen. I found a note on the kitchen counter, scrawled in Anna's familiar handwriting. It was short, just a few lines about needing space, about how she couldn't believe what I'd done. But there was no apology, no acknowledgement of her own betrayal. Just more excuses, more ways to avoid the truth. I crumpled the note and tossed it aside. I didn't need her words, I didn't need her justifications. The festival was over, and so was everything that had come before it. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, sat on the porch, and watched the sun dip below the horizon, the sky streaked with shades of red and orange. It was beautiful, in a way, but it didn't feel real. Nothing did anymore. As night fell, I made a decision. There was nothing left for me here, no more festival, no more Anna, no more pretending that we could fix what was broken. It was time to go. I packed a bag, leaving most of my things behind. I wasn't running away, I was just done. Done with the lies, the games, the constant ache of knowing I'd lost something I could never get back. I didn't leave a note. I didn't say goodbye. I just got in my car and drove, letting the miles put distance between me and the life I'd tried so hard to hold on to. As I passed the park where the festival had been, I glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing the empty field lit only by the faint glow of the streetlights. It looked so different now, just another empty space in a town full of them. I kept driving, the road stretching out in front of me, endless and uncertain. I didn't know where I was going. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't care. All that mattered was that I was moving forward, leaving the wreckage behind. I drove for hours that night, guided by nothing but the dark stretch of highway and the occasional glow of distant towns. I kept the radio off, preferring the silence, letting it drown out the noise in my head. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but the idea of explaining everything felt pointless. The festival, the betrayal, the revenge, it was all behind me. But the weight of it clung to my chest like an anchor. I stopped at a rundown motel just off the interstate, The kind of place that didn't ask questions and charged by the night. The room was small and smelled faintly of bleach, with a flickering neon sign outside the window casting an eerie glow over the bed. I tossed my bag on the floor and collapsed onto the mattress, staring up at the stained ceiling. This was my life now, one night, one room at a time, no plan, no destination. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Anna's face in the crowd, the shock and hurt written all over it. I'd gotten what I wanted. I'd made her and Todd feel the sting of their betrayal. But now, alone in this cheap motel, it felt hollow. The truth was, no amount of public shaming could take away the pain of losing her. The festival might have been my statement, but it hadn't fixed anything. It hadn't filled the gaping hole inside me. I woke up the next morning feeling numb. I didn't have anywhere to be. No meetings to attend, no responsibilities pulling me in any direction. It was a strange kind of freedom, but it was also terrifying. For so long, my life had revolved around Anna and our shared dreams, and now, with nothing left, I was just drifting. I wandered through small towns, stopping at diners and gas stations, trying to find something to anchor me. I met strangers along the way, truckers, waitresses, travelers with their own stories of loss and regret. We exchanged small talk over bad coffee and greasy food. But I never stayed long enough for anything deeper. I didn't want to connect. I didn't want to feel. One night, I found myself at a bar in a dusty little town I couldn't even remember the name of. The place was nearly empty, save for a few locals nursing their drinks in the corner. I sat at the bar, ordered a whiskey, and stared into the glass like it held all the answers. The bartender, an older guy with a tired face, glanced at me but didn't push for conversation. He just poured another round when my glass ran dry. "Rough night?" he finally asked, breaking the silence. I shrugged, taking another sip. "Rough year." He nodded like he'd heard it all before. "Sometimes, it doesn't get better. You just learn to live with it." His words hit harder than I expected, a blunt truth I hadn't been ready to face. I realized then that no matter how far I drove, no matter how many miles I put between me and my old life, the pain was still there. Running away wasn't the solution, it was just a distraction. I finished my drink, left a tip on the bar, and walked out into the cool night air. The town was quiet, the streets empty, and for a moment, I stood there, staring at the stars. I hadn't looked up in so long, too caught up in my own mess to see anything beyond it. But now, under that vast sky, I felt small and insignificant, like my problems were just a tiny speck in the grand scheme of things. Maybe the bartender was right. Maybe it didn't get better. But as I stood there, breathing in the stillness, I realized that I was still here. Still standing. And maybe that was enough, for now. The days blurred together as I continued to wander, each town bleeding into the next. I was living out of my car, showering at truck stops, and finding solace in the anonymity of the road. There was something freeing about it, this life with no attachments, no expectations. But it was also lonely. The kind of loneliness that seeps into your bones and makes you question every choice you've ever made. Eventually, I found myself in a quiet coastal town, drawn by the promise of the ocean and the idea of starting over. The place was small, with weathered houses and fishing boats lining the docks. It was the kind of town where everyone knew each other's business, but I didn't mind. I liked the idea of being a stranger, someone with no past, no baggage. I rented a tiny apartment above a bait shop, just a few blocks from the beach. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and that felt like a start. I got a job at a nearby marina, helping with boat repairs and maintenance. It was hard, physical work, but it kept my mind busy, and that was all I needed. The owner, a gruff old man named Jack, didn't ask questions. He took me on with a handshake and a mutual understanding that we both had our reasons for being there. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, I settled into a routine. I'd wake up early, grab a coffee at the local diner, and head down to the marina. I spent my days sanding hulls, fixing engines, and watching the waves roll in. The ocean became my therapy. Its constant ebb and flow a reminder that life kept moving, whether I was ready for it or not. Anna crossed my mind less frequently, her image fading like an old photograph left out in the sun. I'd heard through mutual friends that she and Todd had split not long after the festival. Apparently, the fallout had been messier than I'd anticipated, with Todd's reputation taking a hit and Anna retreating from the public eye. Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly, I just felt sad. We'd both lost so much, and in the end, no one had really won. One evening, after a long day at the marina, I found myself sitting on the beach, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in hues of pink and gold, the kind of sunset that made you forget, even if just for a moment, all the things that weighed you down. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through old photos, pictures of the festival, of Anna and me back when things were still good. I hesitated, then deleted them all. It was time. I still didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what the future held or if I'd ever truly move past everything that had happened. But sitting there, with the sound of the waves in my ears and the salty breeze on my face, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. I stood up, brushed the sand off my jeans, and made my way back toward town. The lights were starting to flicker on, and the sound of laughter drifted from a nearby bar. I thought about going in, maybe striking up a conversation with someone new. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, I'd let myself start over for real. For now, I was okay with taking things one day at a time. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to travel. And that was more than enough. Life in the coastal town settled into a rhythm that was comforting in its simplicity. Mornings began with the hum of fishing boats heading out to sea, their engines cutting through the early morning fog. I'd wake up to the sound of seagulls squawking outside my window, a constant reminder of where I'd landed, a place far removed from the chaos of my old life. Work at the marina became my anchor, a steady routine that gave me purpose. I found myself drawn to the people there, gruff fishermen, seasoned sailors, and the small community of locals who had made the town their home. Jack, the marina's owner, became something of a mentor, though neither of us would ever call it that. He'd seen his share of rough patches and, without prying, seemed to understand that I was working through my own. One afternoon, after finishing up a particularly stubborn engine repair, Jack handed me a beer and nodded toward the end of the dock. "You ever think about what comes next?" I took a swig, letting the cold drink wash away the day's heat. I hadn't really thought about the future, not beyond the next day's work or the next quiet evening spent watching the waves. But his question lingered, poking at the edges of my mind. "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess I'm just trying to figure it out as I go." Jack chuckled, lighting a cigarette and blowing smoke into the salty air. "Ain't we all? But don't let this place become a crutch. Sooner or later, you gotta decide if you're running away or running towards something." His words stayed with me long after he walked away, echoing in my mind as I wandered through the town later that evening. I found myself at the local bar, a cozy dive filled with a mix of tourists and regulars. I'd been coming here more often, gradually letting the town's people pull me into their orbit. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I spotted Kate, the bartender, with a warm smile on her face as she poured drinks and chatted with the patrons. She'd been one of the first people in town to welcome me, and over the months, we'd fallen into an easy friendship. She had a quick wit and a no-nonsense attitude that I appreciated, and there was something about her presence that made the bar feel a little less lonely. "Hey stranger," she greeted me as I took a seat at the bar. "The usual?" "Yeah, thanks," I replied, watching as she expertly mixed my drink. We made small talk, but there was a comfortable silence between us, a quiet understanding that didn't need words. As the night wore on, the bar filled with the familiar hum of laughter and conversation. I found myself relaxing, the weight of the past loosening its grip on my shoulders. Kate leaned over, setting a fresh drink in front of me. "You've been around here a while now," she said, her tone casual but probing. "Ever thought about sticking around for good?" I shrugged, not ready to commit to an answer. "Maybe. It's a good place." "It is," she agreed, her eyes lingering on mine for a moment before moving on to the next customer. "Just don't let your past keep you from finding a future. Life's too short for that." Her words hit me harder than I expected, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself imagine a future that wasn't defined by what I'd lost. I looked around the bar, the people, the town, the life I'd stumbled into, and realized that maybe, just maybe, this could be the start of something new. Chapter 10: Finding Closure. Months passed, and the seasons began to change, the warm summer days giving way to the crisp chill of fall. The town shifted with the weather, the tourist crowds thinning, leaving behind the core community that called this place home. I'd grown to love the quieter pace, the familiar faces, and the sense of belonging that had slowly taken root. I found myself thinking less about Anna and Todd, the festival, and all the anger that had once consumed me. It wasn't that the memories didn't still hurt. They did, but with time, they had lost their sharp edges, becoming more like scars than open wounds. I'd built something for myself here, a life that was far from perfect but was mine all the same. One afternoon, I was working on a boat when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated before opening it, my stomach tightening when I saw Anna's name. "Hey Brian, I'm in town. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, torn between old habits and the new life I'd built. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to let the past stay buried. But another part, the part that still remembered the good times, knew that I needed this. I needed closure. We met at a small cafe by the water, the kind of place that didn't attract much attention. Anna was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a cup of coffee in front of her. She looked different, tired, maybe a little older, but so was I. Life had a way of doing that. "Hey," she said softly, her eyes searching mine. "Thanks for meeting me." I nodded, taking a seat across from her. The silence between us was heavy, filled with all the things we hadn't said over the past year. For a moment, we just sat there, two people who used to know each other better than anyone, now reduced to strangers by the choices we'd made. "I'm sorry," Anna finally said, her voice breaking. "For everything. For Todd, for the lies, for how it all ended. I never meant to hurt you." I listened, letting her words sink in. I'd spent so long imagining this moment, thinking that hearing her apology would fix something inside me. But now, face to face with the reality of it, I realized that no words could change what had happened. Still, I appreciated her saying them. "I'm sorry, too," I replied, surprising even myself. "I'm sorry for how I handled things. The festival. I was angry, and I wanted you to feel the pain I was feeling. But it didn't solve anything." We talked for a while longer, sharing pieces of our lives that we'd kept hidden. Anna told me about her fallout with Todd, her attempts to rebuild her career, and the regrets that haunted her. I told her about the marina, the town, and how I was slowly finding my way back to myself. In the end, there was no grand resolution, no neat ending to tie up the loose threads. But as we parted ways, I felt lighter, like I'd finally let go of a weight I'd been carrying for too long. We hugged briefly, an unspoken acknowledgement of what we'd been and what we'd lost. As I watched her walk away, I knew that this was the last chapter of our story. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was an honest one, and that was enough. I turned back toward the water, the waves lapping at the shore, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I was moving forward, one day at a time, carving out a new life from the pieces of the old one. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I knew that I was exactly where I needed to be. The days rolled on in that sleepy coastal town, and with each sunrise, I felt more settled in my new life. I'd wake up early, the morning fog still hanging thick over the water, and head down to the marina. There was something grounding about starting the day with hard work, fixing boats, mending nets, keeping my hands busy while my mind wandered. Jack had started to trust me with more responsibilities, giving me the reins on bigger projects. He even hinted at letting me take over the marina when he decided to retire. Though he never came out and said it directly. I think he knew I wasn't quite ready for that kind of commitment, but the offer was there, lingering between us like an unspoken promise of a future I hadn't yet considered. One crisp fall morning, I was down at the docks working on a boat that had seen better days. The wood was old and splintered, the paint faded, but there was a history there, a story that felt oddly familiar. I'd been sanding down the hull, lost in thought, when Kate appeared at the end of the dock, her hands shoved into the pockets of her jacket. "You keep working like that, you're gonna be a permanent fixture around here," she teased, her breath visible in the chilly air. I smiled, wiping my hands on a rag. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. She leaned against a post, looking out at the water. "So, what's next for you, Brian? You gonna keep hiding out here, or are you thinking about sticking around for good?" I glanced at her, catching the hint of something in her voice, a mix of curiosity and something else, something that felt like hope. We'd spent more time together lately, sharing dinners, taking walks along the beach, and talking about everything and nothing at all. It wasn't serious. Not yet, but it was nice. Easy. And after everything I'd been through, that was more than enough. "I don't know," I admitted. "For the first time in a long time, I'm not in a rush to figure it all out." Kate nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I get that. But just so you know, this town's got a way of growing on people. You might wake up one day and realize you found exactly what you've been looking for. I watched her walk away, her words echoing in my mind. She was right. This place had a pull on me that I couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was the people, the sense of community, or the way the ocean always seemed to wash away the weight of the past. Or maybe it was simply that, for the first time, I felt like I could see a future here. That evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I took a walk down the beach. The tide was low, and the wet sand glistened under the fading light. I'd come to love these quiet moments, where the world felt still and my thoughts could settle. I sat down near the water's edge, letting the waves lap at my feet, and pulled out my phone. I hadn't used it much lately, preferring the solitude and simplicity of my new life. But tonight, something compelled me to look back, just for a moment, at the life I'd left behind. I scrolled through old messages, photos, and memories that felt like they belonged to someone else. I thought about the festival, the revenge, and the empty satisfaction it had brought. I thought about Anna, and how our dreams had crumbled under the weight of betrayal. But most of all, I thought about how far I'd come since then. I closed my eyes, breathing in the salty air, and for the first time, I let myself forgive, not just Anna, but myself. For the mistakes, the anger, the time I'd lost trying to make sense of it all. I was done running, done holding on to things that no longer mattered. I stood up, the cool water swirling around my ankles, and looked out at the vast expanse of the ocean. It was endless, unpredictable, and full of possibilities, much like my life now. And as I turned back toward town, the lights flickering on one by one, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a quiet, steady sense of contentment. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges, but for tonight, I was exactly where I needed to be. I'd found a place to call home, people who cared, and a future that was mine to shape. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The marina was quiet in the early morning light, a thin mist hovering over the water like a blanket. I'd grown to love these moments before the town woke up when everything felt still and untroubled. I was sitting on the dock with a coffee in hand, staring out at the ocean, when Jack strolled up, his footsteps echoing against the wooden planks. "You've been coming here earlier and earlier," he noted, sitting down beside me. He pulled out a small flask, adding a splash of whiskey to his own coffee, and then offered it to me with a sly grin. I chuckled, shaking my head. "No thanks, it's a bit early for that." Jack took a sip and leaned back, gazing out at the horizon. "You know, Brian, I've been thinking about this place, about you sticking around. Hell, maybe even about retiring sooner rather than later. The marina could use someone like you to keep it running." His words hung in the air, and I took a moment to let them sink in. I'd never pictured myself as the guy who'd settled down in a small town, running a marina, but the idea didn't scare me the way it might have a year ago. It felt possible. "I appreciate that, Jack," I said finally. "I really do. I think I'm still figuring it all out." Jack nodded, not pushing, just letting me be. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the soft lapping of the waves and the distant cry of seagulls. There was something soothing about it, something that made me feel like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Later that day, I found myself back at the beach, wandering along the shoreline with no particular destination in mind. I'd started doing this a lot, walking, thinking, and letting my mind drift. It was my way of processing everything that had happened, of trying to make peace with the past. As I rounded a bend, I spotted Kate sitting on a blanket, staring out at the water. She looked up when she saw me, her face breaking into a smile that felt warm and familiar. I made my way over, and she patted the spot next to her, inviting me to sit. "Taking another one of your thinking walks?" she teased, her tone light but affectionate. I shrugged, smiling back. "Yeah, something like that." We sat side by side, watching the waves roll in and out. There was a comfortable silence between us, the kind that didn't need to be filled with words. Kate had become my anchor in more ways than one, and though we hadn't put a label on whatever this was between us, it felt good. Natural. "You ever think about going back?" she asked suddenly, her voice soft. "To your old life, I mean." I paused, considering her question. I thought about everything I'd left behind, the music, the festival, the dreams that had crumbled when everything fell apart. For a long time, I'd held on to those memories like a lifeline, afraid to let them go. But now, sitting here with Kate, I realized that I didn't miss that life. Not really. No, I said, the answer coming out more easily than I expected. I'm not that person anymore. And I don't think I want to be. Kate smiled, her eyes meeting mine. Good, because you've got a pretty great thing going here, Brian. And if you ask me, you'd be crazy to give it up. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. And she squeezed back. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a promise, a quiet acknowledgement of everything we'd both been through and everything we still had ahead of us. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the water, and for the first time, I felt like I was ready to let go of the past completely. I'd spent so long holding on to anger and regret, but now, all I wanted was to move forward. To build something new, something real. As the first stars began to dot the sky, I turned to Kate, feeling a lightness in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. You know, I think I'm done with running. I want to stay here, with you, with this, whatever this is. Kate smiled, leaning in to rest her head on my shoulder. Sounds like a plan to me. We sat there as the sky darkened, wrapped in the kind of peaceful silence that spoke louder than words. I knew that life would keep throwing challenges our way. Nothing was ever perfect, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. I was no longer defined by what had happened, by the mistakes and betrayals that had once consumed me. I was just Brian, a guy who'd found his way back to himself, one step at a time. And as the waves crashed softly against the shore, I knew that whatever came next, I was finally ready for it. The days continued to blend together in the way they do when life finds a rhythm, and I was finally starting to feel like this small town was where I belonged. Mornings at the marina, afternoons spent working on side projects with Jack, and evenings with Kate. It was simple, but it was mine. For the first time, I wasn't haunted by the festival, by the anger that used to drive every decision I made. But sometimes, the past has a way of catching up when you least expect it. It was a rainy afternoon when Kate came into the shop, her expression tense. I looked up from the boat engine I'd been tinkering with, immediately sensing that something was off. She held a crumpled envelope in her hand, her fingers nervously twisting the paper. This was at the front desk, she said, handing it to me. No return address, just your name on it. I stared at the envelope, my pulse quickening. There was only one person who would bother sending me anything, Anna. I hadn't heard from her since I left town, and I hadn't exactly been eager to reconnect. Whatever was in that envelope, I knew it wouldn't be good. Kate watched me, concern etched across her face. You don't have to open it if you don't want to. Memories of the past flooding back. I could almost hear her voice, that same manipulative tone she always used when she wanted something. I folded the letter and shoved it into my pocket, feeling an uncomfortable mix of anger and unease. What does she want? Kate asked quietly, sensing the turmoil brewing inside me. She wants to meet, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Says she has things she needs to tell me. Kate frowned, crossing her arms. You don't owe her anything, Brian. Not after everything that happened. She was right. I knew she was. But part of me still felt unfinished, like there were things left unsaid that I needed to confront. I didn't want to meet with Anna, but I couldn't deny the nagging feeling that this was the last loose thread keeping me tethered to the past. I'll think about it, I said, trying to push the conversation aside. I just need some time. Kate nodded, squeezing my hand in silent support. I knew she didn't like it, but she trusted me to figure it out. I spent the rest of the day trying to keep busy, but my mind kept drifting back to the letter, to the possibility of finally closing that chapter of my life for good. As the sun set, I found myself walking back to the beach, the place where I always went when I needed to clear my head. I watched the waves crash against the shore, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink, and I knew what I had to do. If I wanted to truly move on, I had to face this one last ghost from my past. The coffee shop where Anna had asked to meet was almost empty. With just a few scattered customers and the faint hum of jazz music playing in the background. I spotted her as soon as I walked in. She was sitting by the window, staring out at the rain-soaked street. She looked different, worn down in a way that went beyond the physical. There was a heaviness about her that I hadn't seen before, like life had caught up to her in ways I couldn't even imagine. Brian, she said as I approached, her voice small and unsure. I nodded, taking a seat across from her. The table between us feeling like a chasm that neither of us could cross. So, I began, keeping my tone neutral. What do you need to say? Anna fidgeted with her cup, her eyes darting around the room. She looked nervous, like she wasn't sure how to start. Finally, she let out a sigh and met my gaze. I'm sorry, Brian, for everything. I know that doesn't fix what I did, but I needed you to hear it. I nodded, not sure what to say. Her apology felt hollow, but I knew it was something she needed to get off her chest. She talked about her life since the festival, how she'd lost Todd not long after everything blew up, and how she'd been trying to pick up the pieces ever since. She sounded lost, like she was still stuck in the wreckage of her own choices. I've been going to therapy, she continued, her voice trembling. Trying to understand why I did what I did. I've hurt a lot of people, but I hurt you the most, and I don't think I'll ever forgive myself for that. I listened, letting her words wash over me. I realized then that I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't feel the need for revenge or closure or any of the things that used to consume me. All I felt was a strange, quiet acceptance. We were both just two people who'd made mistakes, and now we were trying to find our way through the fallout. I'm glad you're getting help, I said finally, my voice calm. But I've moved on, Anna. I'm not the person I was back then, and I don't think you are, either. We can't change what happened, but we can let it go. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I know. Thank you for meeting me. I needed to say it. We parted ways shortly after, and as I stepped out into the rain, I felt lighter. The conversation hadn't fixed anything, but it had given me something I didn't know I needed, permission to let go. As I walked back to my car, I thought about the life I'd built, the new connections I'd made, and the peace I'd finally found. Anna was a part of my story, but she wasn't the end of it. I had more ahead of me now, a life I was finally ready to live on my own terms. I drove back to town with the windows down, the cool air rushing in, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The road was wide open, and I was ready for whatever came next. Life moved on after that rainy afternoon, but in a way, it felt different, lighter, freer. I'd left that coffee shop with a sense of finality, like I'd finally closed a book I'd been carrying around for far too long. The days that followed were filled with the simple routines I'd grown to cherish. Mornings at the marina, lunches at the little diner by the pier, and evenings spent with Kate, where laughter and quiet moments felt like the perfect antidote to everything that had come before. One afternoon, Jack approached me with a look I'd come to recognize, a mix of mischief and a kind of fatherly pride. He'd been dropping hints for weeks now, nudging me towards something bigger than just fixing boats and patching up old sails. You got a minute? He asked, wiping his hands on an oily rag. Sure, what's up? Jack motioned toward his small office, cluttered with papers, fishing gear, and the smell of old coffee. He pulled out a folder and placed it on the desk between us. Inside were plans for an expansion, new docks, a small cafe, and even a rental service for tourists looking to explore the coast. It was ambitious, far more than the sleepy marina we'd been running, but it was also a vision of something that could really thrive. I want you to be part of this, Jack said. His voice steady but filled with a quiet excitement. Not just as a worker, but as a partner. You've put in the time, the effort. Hell, you've practically run the place these past few months. I'm ready to start slowing down, and I think it's time you start speeding up. The offer hung in the air, and I could feel the weight of it, a chance to put down roots, to really make this place my own. I thought about everything that had brought me here, all the twists and turns that had led me to this exact moment. It wasn't the life I'd once dreamed of, but maybe it was better. It was real, it was earned, and it was mine. Are you sure about this, Jack? I asked, trying to hide the mix of nerves and excitement brewing inside me. He chuckled, clapping me on the shoulder. I've never been more sure of anything. You've got what it takes, Brian. Now it's just a matter of deciding if this is what you want. I nodded, staring at the plans spread out before me. It wasn't just about the marina, it was about building something new. Something that felt like home. I didn't have to think long. I shook Jack's hand, sealing the deal with a grin that felt like the start of something good. As the days passed, Kate and I continued to grow closer. We were still taking things slow, but the unspoken bond between us deepened with every shared meal, every late-night conversation, and every quiet walk along the beach. She was my anchor, my confidant, and the person who'd been there when I needed someone the most. One evening, after a long day of working on the expansion plans, Kate surprised me with a picnic on the beach. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light over the water, and we sat on a blanket, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the waves roll in. It was one of those perfect moments that you wish you could bottle up and keep forever. So, partner, she teased, raising her glass in a mock toast. How does it feel to be officially tied to this place? I laughed, clinking my glass with hers. Feels good. Really good, actually. I never thought I'd end up here, but now I can't imagine being anywhere else. Kate leaned in, resting her head on my shoulder, and we watched as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon. There was a quiet contentment between us, the kind that didn't need words to be understood. It wasn't a fairy tale, and it wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And for the first time, that felt like more than enough. As the stars began to dot the sky, I thought about the long road that had brought me to this moment. The festival, the betrayal, the anger, it was all still there, a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I'd built a new life from the wreckage of the old one, and it was better than anything I could have planned. I glanced over at Kate, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the moonlight, and I knew that whatever came next, I was ready for it. There would still be challenges, setbacks, and days when things didn't go as planned, but I'd learned that life wasn't about getting everything right. It was about showing up, finding your own way, and making peace with the past so you could move forward. We stayed on the beach long after the wine was gone, wrapped in the comforting embrace of the night. And as we watched the waves continue their endless dance against the shore, I realized that I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. For the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I was meant to be.